Welcome, my dear. In this lecture, I will discuss some policies regarding security. The objective for this lecture is that at the end of this lecture, you would be able to recognize the importance of different security policies and understand various policies which are required to make our network more secure. You would also be able to learn the elements that are good for development of policies. The roadmap for this presentation is that we are going to define some concepts like ethics, laws, and policies, and we will try to differentiate them, although they seems to be the same things. And then we will focusing on defining user policies, which will include detailed discussion on how we can develop policies for passwords, and then defining administration policies, defining access control policies, developmental policies. After that, we will see the public and private data inside an organization and the policies for them for protection of the for the public data as well as for the private data, and then disaster recovery and some plan for disaster recovery, and finally ethics in education, which is important for the students. Let's see what is ethic. Last week we were discussing about the ethical hacking. So ethic is actually a term that is derived from the Greek word ethos, and which mean like customs, habit, character, nature, moral, principles, honesty, right, fairness, and so on. In simplest form, ethics define a system of moral principles. They affect how people make decisions and how they live their life for the betterment of their self as well as for the society. And actually, it is a branch of philosophy that aims to answer the basic question like, what should I do? And it seeks to resolve many queries of human morality by defining concepts like what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is justice, what is crime, things like that. So what is good for individual and for the society is related with the ethics. And then we have the laws. And laws are actually rules that mandate, or you can say that prohibit certain behavior. But laws are implemented, they are enforced by the state. So you can say that like the system of rules which a particular country or a particular nation or maybe a particular organization, a particular community recognize is regulating the actions of its member, and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. If you break a law, this is the penalty. So the rules that members of a society create to balance the individual rights to self-determination against the needs of the society as a whole, they are called laws. And it is created by the government, and the government, it could be like a nation government, a local government, a regional government, maybe an international law. There are some international laws available. While if you compare the laws with the ethics, ethics are normally governed by an individual by legal or professional norms, like a workplace where you are working, your organization, and there are ethics for the place in which you are working, for the environment in which you are working, and so on. So the law is actually expressed in the constitution in a written form, while ethics there normally cannot be found in written form. And then we have the policies, which is the focus here. And they are like the guidelines that will dictate certain behavior within the organization. And you can say like a collection of statements designed to guide employees' behavior, with regard to the security of the company, security of the information, and security of the system. So the aim of policy is to ensure protection and limit the distribution of data. And policy functions, like in some cases you can say they are like your organizational laws, because they will compel with some penalties, and in some cases some judicial practices. So because these policies functions as laws for some organization, they must be crafted, they must be designed, they must be implemented with great care to ensure that they are complete, they are appropriate, and they are fairly applied to everyone in the workspace. So there is a difference between the policy and the law. Like the ignorance of a policy is an acceptable defense, and policies must be able to stand up in court if challenged. Because if an employee is fired based on a policy violation, it will be challenged. So for a policy to be enforceable, it must meet some criterias. And the criteria for the policy making is that the policy must be disseminated, must be distributed. The organization must be able to demonstrate that the relevant policy has been made readily available for the review by the employee. And the dissemination technique, it could be in the form of hard copy or maybe electronically distributed. And then review, which means reading. The organization must be able to demonstrate that it disseminated the document in an intelligible form, including versions for employees who are illiterate, for example, or maybe the laws must be able to be understood and interpreted by impaired person who are not able to read, or maybe different version in different languages. There is also a solution. Like if your local language is Urdu, then the laws must be written in English as well as in Urdu. Okay, and then the policies must be comprehensive, which mean understandable. The organization must be able to demonstrate that the employee for whom the policies are actually defined, they are able to understand the requirement as well as the content of these policies, and compliance agreement from the other party. So it means that the organization must be able to demonstrate that the employee agreed to comply with the policy through an act of affirmation. And common techniques would include like signing the document, clearly indicating that the employee has read. Although we normally do not read the policies, but that is important. And not only read, but they understand and agreed to comply with the policies. And finally, uniform implementation, enforcement. The organization must be able to make sure that the policy has been uniformly enforced, regardless of employee status or assignment. Only when all of these conditions are met, an organization can enforce some penalties on the employee who actually violate a policy without the fear of legal retribution. Now, there can be policies regarding end user behavior in an organization related to IT. For example, we need to define policies for users. How? It is better to have a policy for every predictable situation in order to be on the safe side. Something may seem like common sense to you, but may not be common sense for someone else. For example, you are an IT professional, but your employee is not. So something like making a password very defensive, very protective, it's normal for you. But for the other, you need to train them. The person who are not actually expert in security, in computer networks, in computer science, you have to define policies for them. Why? Because the misuse of a system is a major problem for many organizations. like using company time and computer to visit irrelevant website during your official time is a crime. Generally, good user policies will outline specifically how people will use the system, will use the resources. For a policy to be effective, it needs to be very clear, very specific, meeting the requirements that we just saw on the previous slide. And sorry, the statements of the policies must be clear. So now we are seeing how we can actually define policies for passwords. There are several areas where effective user policies must be defined. One of them is password. And on password, we had a lot of discussion in our previous classes, like you have to keep your password secure because it is critical. Appropriate passwords are required, and appropriate in the sense that they are not going to be linked with the user profile, like your date of birth, your card number, your mobile number, your personal name, the name of the office at which you are working is not recommended. And now the trend is to use the passphrases instead of using the passwords. And also you must have to enforce the employees to not share their password with their colleagues. Okay, so in reality, no password is secure, no matter how long it is, how complex it is. Okay, but still we have to rely on these passwords. And one of the very obvious policy that should be there on your policy list is you have to instruct the employee, guide the employee that they will not write their password on sticky notes, or they will not paste their password on the notice board on the computer screen or at the workplace at the office in which they are working. Normally some people do this practice just for the ease of life. They actually write their password on the screen. So issues like the length of the password should also be addressed in the policies. What is the minimum length of the password? What is going to be the age of the password? Like, for example, after every 3 months, you have to change your password, 90 days time. And the password history must be kept. Like if you have used password once, then you would not be able to repeat it again. And also, the password history is important, so it must be on your list of policies when you are defining it for the passwords. And system administrator can actually enforce these requirements. However, none of that will be particularly helpful if the user don't manage their password in a secure fashion. So all of this mean you need explicitly policies regarding how users secure their passwords. And some of the policies are mentioned here, like do not place your password in an open place, in an accessible place. And the preference is that they should not be written down at all. But if you want to return them out, then they should be in a secure area, for example, in a lock box at your home, not at the office, not next to your computer. And then password must not be shared with your colleagues, with any person, for any reason. And if an employee believes that his or her password has been compromised, and different ways are possible, even your domain where your email is registered, for example, will send you messages if somebody is trying to access your account from a different computer, from a different device. So if you think your password is compromised, then you should immediately contact the IT department so that your password can be changed, and maybe they would be able to make an attempt to link to trace out the device from which the attempt was made. Now here we have some policies as a guideline. You can follow them. For example, your password must be at least 8 characters. The maximum length is 20. Your password must contain at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and one special symbol. and the symbols must be from these symbols. Okay, and also these are more, so you can have a look on them. Now we need to define policies for the use of internet, because most organizations provide their users with some sort of internet connectivity, internet access. And why we are in need to provide internet access to the employees? Because they will be using it for emails, for official corresponding, for information access, for video conferencing, online meeting, and maybe in some cases for instant messaging. So the internet can be used for legitimate purposes within an organization, but it also brings some serious consequences, some serious security problems. So appropriate policies must be in place to govern the use of internet technologies. For example, it cannot be used for playing games inside your office, your organization. You would not be able to visit restricted websites. You will not use it for social media, although it is allowed in some organization, but it depends. You will not be using internet to violate something something like disclose information about your organization, about your country, or maybe you will not be using it for violating the federal laws or provisional laws. You would not be using the internet for conducting your online business inside your office. If you have a side business, and you are using your official timing to boom your businesses, to work for your own business, there is something which need to be restricted in policies. In addition, there are some gray areas. Some activities might be acceptable, might be allowed in some organization, but not in other. For example, online shopping during your lunchtime, making use of social media during your lunchtime or during your break, reading news articles, or maybe if you get bored and you visit some humorous websites. So in some organization it is allowed. So it is critical that any organization have very clear policies dealing specifically what is and what is not acceptable related to the use of web and internet. And you should also remember that most proxy servers and many firewalls, they can actually block certain websites. So this must be in written form in the policies. And this will also help prevent employee from misusing the company internet. And these are some policies. As an example, you can study them. Like for example, the internet access via this university, all traffic must be in line with the user policies. Okay, and you would not be able to use your privileges. You will not be able to excessively use your privileges, because if you are downloading very high uh, quality videos, then there are possibility that it will affect the performance of the network, and maybe other employees who are actually working who are actually working on something useful, they would be affected by this download. And the internet must not be used inappropriately, so you would not be publishing material about the university, about the organization in which you are working to outside. You will not be using internet to download software which actually breach the security of the company. And then policies related with the email usage. Most businesses and even academic activities now occurs via email. We know that email also happen to be the primary vehicle for malware distribution. An attachment. An attacker can easily attach a file and convince the user to download it. It could be a malware, a Trojan horse. So this means that email security is a significant issue for many organizations and also for the network administrator. So an administrator cannot simply ban all email attachment. That is not possible because sometime you would be need to send an official document. So however, the administrator can establish some guidelines, some policies how to handle email attachment just to guide the user who are not professional in that area. And the guidelines should be like user should only open an attachment if it meets some criteria. What should be that criteria? Like the email is from the same domain. If you are a student of CCOS University and you receive an email from another CCOSian, then it is expected, or it is like for sure is going to be something. Uh, if it is from your colleague, then it is going to be an official document in attachment. But if it is from the outside domain and you are going to download the attachment, then you must have to make sure who actually the source is, who sent, who is the person, who is the email. In some scenario you have to ask that person, or in other scenarios you must have to take guidelines of the administrator. And no one inside the organization should ever open an attachment that is like from unknown source, or it contains some active code or executable file like exe files, like JavaScript attachment, or maybe if it is an animation or a movie, because they are more vulnerable, there are more chances. So the email itself does not appear legitimate, then you do not need to open it. And sometimes some legal email will go to the spam folder and some spammed email will go to the inbox, so you have to be careful. And we need to clearly define policies. Here is an example of the email usage. Here you can see you must be careful when sending emails that will contain personal or confidential information about yourself, about your account, or about the organization. You need to avoid sending sensitive information in email. Try to minimize the use of graphics, attachment, use of different fonts. I always write my email by using plain text. And about attachment, do not open attachment from unknown sources. Now this is a policy and it must be shared with the users, with the employees. And other policies, you have a look on it later on. Then we need to define policies for installing and uninstalling different softwares. And users should not be allowed to install anything on their machines by their own. What does it mean? It means installation of software, wallpapers, screensavers, utility programs, anything. The best approach is to limit their login privileges, and that is possible, so that they cannot install anything at all. However, this should become like coupled with a strong policy statement prohibiting the installation of anything on your PC. However, in some scenario, you would be required to install something useful. If that is the case, it should be scanned first by the IT department and it must be approved from the IT department, or they may be requested to install the software for you on your PC. This process might seem cumbersome, but it is necessary. Even some organizations go far as to remove or at least disable media drives like CD-ROM, USB drive, and so on from the end user PCs. So installation now from these devices is not possible. But still you can download a file from the internet, but in that case you have to follow the internet policies, the internet usage policies, which will restrict you from downloading anything from the internet. Okay. And here are some policies like illegal software programs is not allowed, unlicensed application, pirated software are not allowed, software that are purchased for personal or home use, that is not allowed because the IT department has no idea about that software. So permission is required from the IT department or seeking help from them. We also need to define policy for instant messaging, although is not very normal form of communication inside the offices, but still there are organizations that they do have their own instant messaging tools, softwares, and they are using it for sharing information during their office hours. So instant messaging is also used and maybe abused by employees in the companies, in the organization, in the institutions. In some cases, instant messaging can be used for legitimate business purposes. However, it also poses a significant security risk. There have been viruses that specifically propagated via instant messaging. So it is recommended that instant messaging simply be banned from all computers within an organization. Or if you find if you still want to allow it, then you must establish very strict guidelines for its use. Like instant messaging can only be used for business communication, not personal conversation. Now, it might be difficult to enforce, but rules like, for example, prohibiting personal web browsing is also difficult, but we enforce it. So we must need policies for instant messaging usage, like no confidential or no private business information should be sent via instant messaging to other users outside the organization. And desktop configuration. Many users like to configure their desktop the way they want. This means like changing the background, using a screensaver, changing the font size, changing the resolution. Well, theoretically speaking, this is not a very high level risk, security hazard. But for example, simply changing your computer background image, it cannot compromise your computer security. However, there are other issues related. For example, the first issue is where the background image comes from. Frequently, an user will download images from the internet. This means there is a chance of getting a virus, a malware, particularly one using a hidden extension, for example, .exe file or JPG file. So there are also human resources and harassment issues. If an employee uses a desktop or a screensaver that is offensive for other employees, for example, so you must be careful about it. Another problem that is technical: if you give user access to change their background, their screensaver, their resolution, you must give them rights that will also allow them to change other system setting. You might not be interested that the user should change those settings. The graphical display option are not separated from other type of configuration option. So you give permission for one thing, and there are chances that the user will take advantage of those permission to make configuration changes in other stuff. Maybe they would be able to configure the network card, the network internet connection, firewall setting, things like that. So you must be careful. This is something which is going to be a huge security problem for many organizations. Bring your own device, and it become a significant issue. Most of your employees will have their own smart devices, smartphones, smart tablets, laptops, smartwatches, Fitbits, and they will carry with them into their workspaces. When they connect to your wireless network, to your wired network, this introduce a new host of new security concern. You have control on your on your workspace PC, but you have no control over the devices that the users, that the employees will bring with themselves. You have no idea what networks that devices previously were connected, what software were installed on them, what data might be exfiltrated by these personal devices. So in highly secure environment, the obvious solution is to forbid personal owned devices. And this is the case for many agencies here in our country. If you want to visit a place which is like a highly secured area, then you must have to left your devices at the gate. However, in many organizations, such policy is impractical. So a workaround for this is to have a Wi-Fi network that is dedicated only for those bring your own devices and is not connected to the company main network. Another approach is like technologically more complex, but is to detect the device on connection, and if it is not a company issued device, you can limit the access for that particular device. So whatever approach you take, you must have some policy regarding personal devices usage because they are already ubiquitous. And just a few years ago, smartphones were around, but now we do have other smart devices, notepad, smart watches, Fitbits, gadgets, electronic gadgets, and now Internet of Things devices. So it is difficult to predict what new smart devices might boom on the horizon. Now, some final thoughts about user policies. It is critical that many organizations implement solid user policies, as we just saw. However, these policies will not be effective unless you have clearly defined consequences for violating them. Many organizations find it helpful to spell out specific consequences that escalate with each accident. Like, for example, you can define something like if the first incident occurs of violating a policy, then this is going to be a verbal warning for the employee. If the same incident can occur for the second time, then there is going to be a written warning. And if the same thing happen for the third time, then maybe it will result in suspension or maybe in termination. In case of academic setting, this could be like suspension or exclusion as well. So you must clearly list the consequences, the penalties, and all the users should sign a copy of the user policies upon being hired. This prevents employees claiming that they were not aware of the policies. So it is also important to realize that there is another cost to misuse of the policies and the penalties should be there. Now the second domain, policies for the administrators. In addition to determining the policies for the end user, you must have some clear defined policies for the system administrator. There must be a procedure for adding user, for removing a user, for accessing, for giving rights to the user, to deal with the security issues, how to change systems, things like that. So first let us see what are the policies for adding a new employee in the organization. When a new employee is hired, the system administration policy must define specific steps to safeguard company security. New employee must be given access to the resources and application that they would require. The granting of that access must be documented. It is also critical that the new employee receive a copy of the company security, the computer security, the devices security on which he or she would be working. And he or she must accept those policies and sign the document acknowledging the receipt of such policies. Well, before a new employee starts to work, the IT department, specifically the network administrator, should receive a written request from the business unit, from the HR department, for example, that the person will be working and the resources that person would require. That request should specify exactly what resources this user will be using, will be needing when he or she start the work. Then the person who is managing network administrator or network security should approve and sign the request. After that, you have to create an account, for example, this new user on a system. Well, beside from policies for the new user, we need to define policies for the departing employees. This is not new. This is the employee who actually leave your organization. So what are going to be the policies if a person is not working with us anymore? So when an employee leave, it is critical to make sure all of his or her logins are terminated and all access to all system is disconnected immediately. Unfortunately, this is an area of security that all too many organizations do not give enough attention. You cannot be certain which employees will bear the company ill will and which won't upon leaving the company. So it is imperative to have all of your former employees access shut down on their last day of work. For example, let me give you a simple example. If you have your university give you an email address on their domain, so what would be the case if you leave the university before completing your degree, or what will be the case if you leave the university after obtaining your degree? Would you still be able to use that account? Well, that is a problem. Some universities will definitely tell you at the beginning of the admission that the email address is their property, and this will only be accessible to you as long as you are working at the universities. But other university will give you an email address that would be with you, for example, up to 5 years, up to 10 years after you leave the university, and other are more strict. Sorry, other are more open. Once they give you an account, it will be with you forever. So it depends on the organization and their policies. So if a former employee, there are some other issues, like for example, uh, an employee is not working anymore with us, but he has the keys, the physical keys. So nothing can stop him from entering and then stealing the information. We will not go into the details of the physical security. We will be focusing on this on the soft side. Like for example, all login accounts to any server, to any resource, any computer through VPN or through physical use, it must be disabled once the employee is not more working. All keys to the facilities should be returned. All accounts for email, for internet access, wireless internet, cell phones, and so on, that must be shut down. Any account for servers, for our servers, that must be cancelled. So the employee workstation, this is something very important. An important policy is that the employee workstation hard drive must be searched before he leave or she leave the organization. Well, this policy might seem odd, but if an employee was gathering data to take with him or conducting any other improper activity, you need to find out right away. There is also a need for defining policies for change request. As the nature of information technology is changing, not only that is not only the case. The end user, they may also come and they may also go. But we do have a case where the requirements are also changing frequently, and business units should request access to different resources. For example, you have an employee who is actually working inside your organization and he needs a software to be installed. His requirements are changed. So change occurring with time. Therefore, it is important to have a change control policy in practice. This process not only make the change run smoothly, but it also allow the IT security personnel to examine the change for any potential security problem before it is implemented. So a change control request should go through the following steps, like for example, an inappropriate manager within the business unit signs the request, who is actually approving the request. In other words, there is no point in pursuing the change request process if the immediate supervisor of the requester has not approved the request. So the appropriate IT unit, like the network administrator, the database administrator, the email admin, the cloud administrator, they actually verify the request if it fill other policies, if it fills under the umbrella of other company policies, then it must be allocated. So the IT security unit actually verify that this change will not cause security problem. This is becoming more and more critical in modern time. So the appropriate IT unit formulate a plan to implement the change and a plan to roll back the change in the event of some failure. We also need policies in case we have a security breach inside our organization. At some point, it is possible that a security breach of some kind will occur. This could mean that you are a target of a denial of service attack, your system is infected with a virus, or maybe an attacker, a hacker gains entrance and destroy or copies your sensitive information. So you must have some sort of plan for how to respond in such events. How to respond if there is a virus, if there is a system who is infected by the virus. When a virus strikes your system, you have to immediately quarantine the infected machine or machines. This means literally unplugging the machine from the network. If it is a subnet, then unplug its switch or disconnect wireless access point. Okay, so these are some policies that you have to follow if a machine is infected or more than one machine are infected by the viruses. And then after implementation of the quarantine, you have to scan and clean each and every infected machine. Since the machines are now off the network, this will be a manual skill. You have to log the incident, the hour, the resources taken to clean the system, and the system that were infected. There, you have to perform certain system cleans by running different antiviruses, things like that. And also you have to notify the appropriate persons in the organization, maybe the leader of the organization, of the event and the action you have taken to deal with that. Sometime denial of service attack happened, and normally your firewall logs or IDS would be able to find out the IP address or addresses who actually generate the attack. And the last case is an attack by an intruder, a hacker, and this is actually the place which need more attention. You have to copy all the logs of the affected systems, and logs are generated by the firewalls, by the IDS, by different servers. And you would be using this as an evidence. So immediately scan all the system for different types of malware that are probably installed by the hacker. And then you have to document everything. You must specify which IT personnel took what action at that time. Some of this data may be part of a later court proceeding. It is probably a good idea to log all activities taken during this time. Now we also need some policies for access control to different devices. It is an important area of security policies that usually generate some controversy as well in the organization. There is always a conflict between the user desire for unbound access. The user loves to have access to everything, to any resource. They also love to have more privileges. However, the security administrator desire is to protect the data, to protect the illegal use of the data, to limit restriction, to give restricted access to the user and the resources. This means that extreme policies are not practical. You cannot simply lock down every resource as completely as possible, since that would impede the user access to those resources. On the other side, you cannot simply allow anyone and everyone complete access to everything. Each person is given the minimum privileges necessary to do the job. This is where the least privileges comes to play. The idea is simple. Each user, including the ID personnel, gets the least access he can have and still effectively do his job. Rather than asking the question, why not give this person access to X device? You should ask the question, why should I give X person access to X device? So if you don't have a very good reason, then don't allow the access. This is one of the fundamental of computer security, and we talked a lot about the access control in our previous lectures. And then we do have some policies for developmental purposes. Unfortunately, many security policies do not address secure programming. No matter how good your firewall, your proxy server, your virus scanner and policies are, if your developers create code that is flawed, that have some back doors. You will have security breaches. If your company currently has no secure programming initiative, this checklist is certainly better than developing in a vacuum. It can also serve as a starting point to get you thinking and talking about secure programming. All code, especially code done by outside parties, by software houses, contractor, consultant, must be checked for backdoor for Trojan horses. All buffer must have error handling that prevents buffer overrun. And also all communication must adhere to your organization's secure guidelines. It includes TCP sockets, sending message, etc. Any code that open any port or perform any sort of communication is thoroughly documented, and the IT security unit is appraised of the code, what it will do and how it will be used. And then data classification. This is something like related with the public information and the private information. So it is critical for organization to classify the information within their organizations. This process is commonly very common in defense department related agencies and organization, but it is less common in civilian sector. So you must define what is public information that can be disseminated publicly to anyone, and private information that is intended only for use internally within the organization. And this type of information can potentially embarrass the company if you disclose them to outsider. So this is a two-tier approach to data classification. Most organizations will have multiple tiers in practice. Finally, let's see some policies for disaster recovery. A disaster is any event that significantly disrupts your organization operation. For example, a hard disk crash, a server is down, a critical server on which you are relying, your organization is relying, is down. Other example could be like natural disaster, fire, earthquake, and things like that. Maybe your telecom provider is down, maybe the internet link connectivity is down, maybe the main cable has cut off. So natural disasters are possible as well. You must have a plan for disaster recovery, and that is known as disaster recovery plan that you have in place to return business to normal operation. This may include a number of items. You must address personal issues. It also includes having specific people to whom you will assign specific tasks. If there is a disaster, who in your organization would be responsible for bringing back the business to normal? So you have alternative facilities available, getting equipped to those facilities. So we need a business continuity plan. A business continuity plan is designed to get minimum business function backup and running at least at some level so you can conduct some type of business. An example would be like if there is a retail store whose credit card processing system is down. Disaster recovery is concerned with getting the system back up and running, and business continuity is concerned with simply getting a temporary solution such as processing credit card manually. So to successfully formulate a business continuity plan, you must consider those systems that are most critical for your business. Okay, so there must be a disaster recovery plan in practice. And also the second concept is that of an impact analysis. Before you can create a realistic business continuity plan, you have to do an impact analysis of what damage to your organization a given disaster might be. This is called a business impact analysis or business impact assessment. Consider, for example, a web server crash. If your organization is doing e-commerce business, then a web server crash is a very serious disaster. However, if your business is an accounting firm and the website is just a way of new customer to find you or information about your organization, then a web server crash is less critical. So you can still do business and earn revenue while the web server is down. So you should make a spreadsheet, for example, of various likely or likely happen disaster, and then do the basic business impact assessment for each case. Fault tolerance. At some point, equipments fail, devices stop working. So, fault tolerance is important. At the most basic level, fault tolerance for a server mean a backup. If a server fail, did you back up the data so you can restore it later on? While database administrator may use a number of different types of data backup facilities, from a security point of view, there are three primary backup types that we need to concern. The first one is full backup plane, then differential, and then incremental. In a full uh, plane, a full backup is the most complete type of backup where you clone all the selected data. It takes longer to backup compared to other types of backup. The other common issue with running full backup is that it overloads storage space. And then we have the differential, which is a type of backup which involves backing up data that was created or changed since the last full backup. To put it simple, a full backup is done initially and then subsequent backups are run to include all the changes made to the files and folders. It let you restore data faster and full backup faster than full backup. The differential is more faster as compared to the full one. And we do have an incremental backup. The first backup here is incremental backup. The first backup here is a full backup like the previous one. So first you have to take a full backup and then succeeding backup will only store changes that were made to the previous backup. Businesses have more flexibility here, spinning these types of backups as often as they want with only the most recent changes stored. So incremental backup requires space to store only the changes, the increments, which allow for a lightning fast backup technique. Finally, we have some ethics in education, and this is going to be your exercise. If you are a student, how you can actually follow some ethics inside your organization. So here are some scenarios. Go through them and try to find answers whether doing such activity in such scenario is something legal or illegal, whether ethically it is allowed or not. So I will left it to you. Try these scenarios by your own and try to find answers. Thank you so much for attending the lecture. Take care and goodbye.